announcing new guidelines for every American to follow over the next 15 days as we combat the virus. Each and every one of us has a critical role to play in stopping the spread and transmission of the virus. We did this today. This was done by a lot of very talented people, some of whom are standing with me.
I remember that day like it was yesterday. I don't know that I've ever been that frustrated in my life, but I remember it like it was yesterday, shutting down a $20 trillion economy for a virus. Joining me now, Jeffrey A. Tucker, founder and president of the Brownstone Institute. Jeffrey, I understand why it's not popular to bring up old things like that, even though it was 5 years ago. But the truth is, that was the beginning of so much destruction, so much inflation, so much that we still feel to this day. The very idea that you shut down a country on purpose for a virus, it's an idea so insane that I can't believe so many people bought it, and everyone on the planet bought it.
We've now published about 15, maybe 17, maybe 20 books on the topic. We have a new one coming out, which is a compilation on all of our research. We haven't even begun to get to the bottom of exactly what happened in those days. I'm obsessed with the topic myself, digging up every bit of information. Trump knows, a lot of people know. Navarro knows. There's a lot of people who know, but very few people are willing to actually speak about it. A lot of what's happening right now with the Trump administration traces to those days. They just went after the head of the guy named who was head of CISA, which is the Cyber Infrastructure Security, whatever, Cyber Security Infrastructure Security Agency. That was in effect the government of 2020. They were in charge of censorship, they were in charge of election security, and they were the first agency that went out there to divide the workforce between essential and unessential. So basically the government, right? It was a small department within Department of Homeland Security, and they assumed the role of essentially running the country, if not the world. And Trump put out an executive order basically attacking the guy who was head of the agency at the time. So, which tells me that Trump knows exactly, who was at fault. I'm not sure if he knows exactly, but he has an intuition that there was profound things going on at that time that resulted in his, a very compromised election. But the story is much bigger than that, as you and I both know, and we're still trying to get to the bottom of it. And yes, it was contrary to the Constitution. It was contrary to all moral intuition. It was contrary to epidemiology and economics and all good sense. It was our first introduction to the meaning and fullness of totalitarian government. That's what happened.
No, it was. I remember it like it was yesterday, standing on the footprints in the grocery store, taking down the outdoor basketball hoops. It was almost as if we have a legion of tyrants in power in this country, and they were waiting for such a day where they could finally take the throne and be the kings and queens they wanted to be. That's what it felt like. It's what it still feels like when I look back on it. I don't know how you can interpret it any other way, frankly.
It was quasi-martial law. We felt it at the time. We were obeying things that weren't actually legislation. We were obeying things that weren't actually laws. We didn't know who was in charge of anything and what the consequences for defiance would be. It was just all vague and strange, and our voices were throttled very quickly, right? I mean, even from middle of March, and certainly by a month later, the censorship was full blown. So we felt, those of us who thought the world was going crazy, we felt very much alone. A lot of our ideological colleagues in the past, if you move in those circles, completely abandoned the cause. They stayed entirely silent, and it went on and on and on, and nobody could really figure out why. Then we had this weird summer 2020 thing where all the cultural and prevailing government elite said, okay, now you have to leave your home to go protest the murder of George Floyd. You remember that? And so suddenly all the young people are out in the streets going, yeah, I'm against racism. And then, cities, whole cities burned down and that sort of thing. And then, I don't know, it's like only weeks later, it was back go back home again. Now it's time to hide from the virus again. And this went on and on and on. And finally, by October, we managed to put together the Great Barrington Declaration, which cut through all the censors and caused panic inside NIH and many other institutions in Washington. And I couldn't even understand entirely why. Looking back now, it's incredibly obvious why the Great Barrington Declaration panicked the people in charge because it said very plainly and in accordance with all of history that the problem would end with exposure and natural immunity. It all even added assisted by vaccines. But that was exactly the problem. The idea that we could just get through this by being a normal society was what panicked the elites because let's put it frankly, it took me like 2 years to realize this. They had a product to sell, and that product was a shot. And they were very concerned that the Great Barrington Declaration would diminish consumer uptake, and that's why they wanted to suppress it. That's why they censored it. And then when the shot was released after the election, right? The election that was heavily compromised by mail-in ballots that were mandated by the CDC back in March and even funded by the CDC back in March. So Trump lost because of those mail-in ballots. Then and only then was the vaccine released. It was deliberately delayed until after the election. But uptake was in fact quite low, as they realized by several months later, and that's when the mandate started. So millions of people eventually were displaced from their jobs, fired, including tenured professors, frontline healthcare workers, anybody who didn't accept the shot, pilots, and all sorts of things. Anybody who didn't accept the shot was threatened with their jobs fired, and the whole nation went into upheaval. But even that didn't work because uptake was still lower than they wanted. They were going for something like 90%. So then came the mask mandates. It's like, okay, you're not going to get the shot. Well, now you have to cover your face everywhere. And even though all existing research said the masks do not stop the spread of a respiratory virus with a zoonotic reservoir, we knew this. They were useless, but suddenly the mask mandates were everywhere, and that went on for another 6 or 8 months. During this period, too, whole cities were shut down. I mean, nobody talks about this. Nobody's like, it's like this history has just vanished. But there were at least 5 cities that closed all public accommodations to the unvaccinated. There were New York and Boston and New Orleans and Seattle and Chicago. Those are the ones we know about. And it was intended to be nationwide. There was such outrage about this that they finally had to roll these things back. But it seems just incredible to think we actually segregated our cities in the United States along lines that had a fantastically racially disproportionate impact on all these cities, so that the minority populations, which tended to refuse the vaccine at a greater rate than majority populations, were actually not allowed into theaters, libraries, and restaurants and bars. So this actually happened in this country. So yeah, I want to get to the bottom of it.
Unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And Jeffrey, honestly, the point of this whole special tonight is how the government just started spending crazily and haven't stopped a thing, have not cut back on a single solitary penny. They got a new injection of drugs, and I'm not convinced they ever will. I'm convinced we will maintain COVID levels of spending until economic collapse.
Yeah, I just looked at the latest thing just passed by the House Republicans. It doesn't really cut a dime. It promises to cut in the future, as it always has. Our
Yes.
friend Thomas Massey voted against it and got attacked for doing so. But yeah, despite all the efforts of Doge, despite all the promises, they're still not cutting the spending. All that new spending during the COVID period was accommodated by money printing, which led to anywhere between 25%, 35%, 40% decline in overall purchasing power of the dollar during the Biden years. So yeah, So our standard of living has diminished. The government has grown. The powers are not really taken away. I mean, Trump's done some things as something like a beginning of change, and I thrill every day to see the executive orders and the changes enacted by the redirection of funding away from the left, and so on. That's quite delightful. But we are nowhere near getting to the bottom line in terms of the truth of that period and what happened, or having any kind of serious discussion about it. Would like to mention very quickly that my friends actually uh, made major efforts to get the DoD to confess what was going on at the military Olympics in October in Wuhan. And the DoD just yesterday, this would have been, say April 8th, April 9th, finally came out with a report, 5 months late, but they finally came out with a report admitting that yes, seven uh, soldiers, got sick with COVID-19 like symptoms. Get this, between October and they dated it very late and January 2020. So, I mean, the report is, the very embodiment of the limited hangout, if you can imagine. So it raises more questions than it answers.
Of course it does. Jeffrey, you were the best. Come back again, sir. I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.